Batman has been rebooted, reimagined, and reintroduced more times than I can count. We've lived through alternate universes, the campy ones, the grumbly voices, the brutal brawlers, the brooding detectives, and yes, even the nipple suit. We've seen the absolute peak of animation maybe in our time, and the lowest depths of live action. At this point, Batman isn't just a character, he's a constant force. He's the gravity around which DC Comics largely orbits, sometimes to the point where you have to wonder if the publisher has forgotten how to fly without him. I mean, seriously, how many Bat-adjacent books do we really need? But over the last year, we were promised something a bit different, given something a little different. On paper, it sounded a bit routine. A familiar writer in Scott Snyder, and a new alternate origin. A Batman stripped of his resources, but this Batman wasn't going to be just another what-if story. It's a creative team asking a dangerous question. If you strip away the myth, does the man still hold the weight? This is our Absolute Batman. To understand why this version matters, we have to look at the foundation. The Absolute Universe wasn't built to just give us more edgy versions of the Trinity. It was designed to challenge the status quo by removing the certainty that we've all grown to be comfortable with. In the prime or main DC universe, heroism is often a legacy. It's clean. In the Absolute world, heroism is a desperate response to a world that feels rigged from the start. Largely because it is. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all familiar names with new, unfamiliar foundations. What makes Absolute Batman so compelling isn't that it tries to make Bruce Wayne bigger, darker, and a little bit more extreme than before, although here he is quite literally a giant, and a bit more violent at times in this. But the nuances aren't stripped away, and they don't end there. This Bruce Wayne is a physical giant. He's a bit more violent, but the brilliance of this run isn't in the escalation of his muscles or tactics. It's in the deconstruction of his soul, as a character and as a legend. Snyder and artist Nick Dragotta are trying to communicate something to us all. Are these characters just old archetypes that we break down every few years to critique and reminisce and eventually just think about how great The Long Halloween is? They're asking, is there something innate, something absolute that survives no matter the era with this character? Is there something larger to all of this, beyond Absolute Batman in and of itself as a book? And can we learn to appreciate Batman not just through the lens of one favorite era, but as a living history? A character built layer by layer by every artist and writer who's touched him. Can we respect the fundamentals enough to watch them be tested, challenged, and ultimately strengthened? By stripping Batman down to his core, to just a boy struck by tragedy. This time, an Absolute Batman stripped of his riches as well and given an honest path to a normal life. He still chooses to become something greater, this time against even larger odds. The choices he makes due to and within his new world remind us why Batman works in the first place, why he has become a legend in not just the fandom, but pop culture at large today. Absolute Batman as a comic, as a story, succeeds not simply by escalating Batman to new physical heights, but by exposing his humanity, his limits, and his innate moral principles. The bedrock of this iteration is in an arc titled The Zoo. In most versions of the mythos, Bruce's trauma is a private affair. A dark alley, 2 gunshots, and a boy left alone in a vacuum of wealth and silence, having had a front row seat to his world crumbling around him. Absolute Batman, however, rejects that isolation entirely, while still using the core of that tragedy. It all happens on a school trip. A school trip Bruce won, not because he's funding it or his father's foundation is donating something to the school system. Bruce won a contest for his engineering project, a disaster relief system for mobilizing resources in difficult areas. So the kids in the class get to visit the zoo. Bruce's father, one of their teachers, accompanies the class on the trip. Just as they venture out to see all the exhibits, it happens. A gunman opens fire in a public space. Thomas Wayne gets the kids inside to shelter, but there's still a few kids out in the open, so his father goes out to get them. The kids make it back, but Bruce's father is killed. But here's the pivot from what we know about Bruce. He isn't the only survivor. His mother is still alive and works with Mayor Jim Gordon, a close family friend. His friends, the Crime Alley kids, for the most part, were all there. Selena, Harvey, Edward, Oswald, and Wayland. They all saw the same muzzle flashes, they all breathed the same copper-centered air. In this universe's Gotham, trauma is largely communal. It's not just Bruce's thing. Not that it ever entirely was his, but you get what I mean. This single shift reframes the entire mission. Batman is no longer born from solitude, he is born from proximity. He doesn't become Batman because he has no one left, he becomes Batman despite having every reason to just try and live a normal life. Where the traditional Bruce builds walls, Absolute Batman builds connections, even if those connections are destined to shatter. One of the smartest choices Absolute Batman makes is refusing to isolate Bruce Wayne in his trauma. Though he is still stubborn and characteristically afraid of getting others hurt or killed. He still blames himself for what happened to his father. And yes, the origin is still brutal: a public space, a happy school trip, all flipped on its head by a senseless act of violence. That act of violence taking Thomas Wayne's life in front of his son and countless other kids. But unlike the traditional Batman myth, this trauma does not seal Bruce off from the world. Not entirely. His mother survives, and just as importantly, so do his friends. A bunch of the children who were there that day, Selina, Harvey, Edward, Oswald, Wayland, they all grow up alongside him. They share the same memory, the same scar, the same formative moment for Bruce, while also living through the rest of their childhoods and all kinds of other trauma and memorable life events, all living in a similar economic and circumstantial position. Each of them grow up and move on to do different things, while staying connected, something every friend group struggles to do as time goes on. Trauma in this universe for Batman and Gotham is largely communal. There's a unique, almost wholesome community between these kids who don't have much and are occasionally outright criminals individually and together. Bruce and Selina have an undeniable connection, leading them to a short-lived life of theft from the elite and wealthy of Gotham before Bruce eventually refocuses on what he wants to do. But his relationship with Selina largely builds who he is and who he can become. Wayland trains Bruce in everything he knows as a fighter. They bond closer than the rest in many ways, leading Wayland to ask Bruce to train him for one of his biggest fights ever, even though Bruce is his student in many ways. But their connection is what Way is looking for in his corner, a story beat that will go on to live with Bruce for the rest of his Batman career. The point being here that Batman is no longer born from unutterable loss and the abyss. He is born largely from friends who first saved him from himself, and a working class spirit that transforms his trauma into a tool for systemic change. Change inspired, of course, by his parents, by the living one and the one that he lost, and by the unshakable morality that Bruce Wayne possesses. This is the same truth that many don't really realize about Batman at his core. And I love how Snyder has taken this perspective and packaged it in such a different way for this series. Batman has never been the epitome of loner culture or those edits on YouTube where it's like, yo, that's so me, I'm so dark for real, and like, just better myself and just focus on myself. Not that any of those are bad or anything, but Batman isn't that in and of himself. Batman starts like that, for sure, in some ways. He's hyper-driven, focused, and self-sacrificial, both out of fear for getting anyone hurt, but also to not lose sight of his mission. Over time, the concluding truth about Batman is more that he was never able to do it all alone. He's always relied on people. Whether that's coming to accept Alfred first instead of pushing him away, or realizing what Dick Grayson brought to his life, and even his war on crime, or working with Gordon, or working with the rest of the Bat family over time. There's a Bat family, after all. Batman is Batman, not because of the suit or the cave or the isolation, but because of his acceptance of others to help bring about the change that he's dedicated his entire life to. And in Absolute Batman, it's no different at its foundation. From shared pain, shared history, and shared failures, each member of the Crime Alley kids supports the others in ways unique to them. This choice fundamentally alters the emotional engine of these first 14 issues that we're focusing on today. In many ways, it sets up what will serve as a familiar core to the future Batman stories yet to be told in this run. Bruce doesn't become Batman because he has no one left and he has to avenge his parents. He becomes Batman despite having reasons not to. And that's the same thing that it's been even in the core Batman mythos. He had all the money and reasons not to do what he does. And again, he has reasons here to achieve his goals some other way, even if it's just out of excuse of limitation and consequences given his status in Absolute Batman. This distinction always matters. This is core to Batman. This distinction matters because it gives him a reason to fight for the living rather than just avenging the dead. A familiar Batman truth brought about in an entirely different way. Where early on traditionally Bruce builds walls, Absolute Batman builds connections, even if those connections are strained, complicated, or destined to break. Even just the unlikely alliance or understanding with Alfred, someone who is diametrically opposed to who and what Batman is early on in this book. Batman doesn't go out of his way to recruit Alfred, but Alfred more or less is caught up in the reality that is this kid waging this unbearably difficult mission, this war on those who prey on others. In most Batman stories, the Rogues Gallery arrives fully formed. Icons of evil first and people second. In many ways, for a few of these characters, Absolute Batman is flipping that order. Here, Harvey Dent isn't a fallen white-knighted ideal yet, he's a friend. Edward Nygma isn't an obsessive puzzle box, he's brilliant, curious, and insecure. Oswald isn't a crime lord, he's a hardened kid trying to survive. And Wayland isn't a monster, he's just a big, disciplined, and fiercely loyal friend. By grounding some of these foundational rogues in shared history, The book reframes Batman's war on crime as something that's far more personal. These aren't evil for the sake of evil villains that Bruce has failed to stop and sends to Arkham over and over. They're people he failed to save. And that guilt is arguably going to be what continues to haunt every punch, every chase, every moral choice he has to make moving forward. This is where Absolute Batman quietly becomes less about crime fighting and more about responsibility. Not just to Gotham, but to the people who helped shape Bruce into who he is. The people that literally helped build the legend of the Batman as his universe is coming to know it, freeing up some of the other familiar foes to be taken to new experimental heights. Again, both literally and figuratively, with Bane and even Joker, but we'll touch on him in another video. The party animals and Black Mask are explored in new, absolutely evil ways right at the start of this series, giving our new Batman a well-framed juxtaposition and pressing him to these new limits. Here we find out early what this Bruce, what this Batman, is made of. We find that same sheer force of will, John Wick energy that Batman's legend has created over compounding years of stories. This is where the Abomination arc of the latter half of these issues take Bruce to new feats of will. And I mean sheer, unadulterated will. His life eventually becomes so utterly marred by chaos, just obliterated in so many ways. It tears up any semblance of safety that any of us as readers sort of felt or maybe felt. The guide rails are just gone, and it's through the eyes of an outsider that we truly see how terrifying and necessary this Bruce really is for this Gotham and that universe. In the classic Batman mythos, I'm sure we're all aware that Alfred is often the conscience. He's the one who often stitches the wounds and reminds Bruce of his humanity. But in Absolute Batman, Alfred doesn't start as the butler. He starts largely as the opposition. He's sent to Gotham as an elite agent to investigate the rising chaos. Alfred isn't looking for a hero. He's looking for a threat. And what he finds is a massive tactical genius who doesn't have a mansion or any of the Bat-themed gadgets. He has a city that's interwoven into who this guy really is. The genius of their relationship in this run is that Alfred has to be won over. He watches this kid wage an unbearably difficult war, not with high-tech gadgets, but with sheer grit and a lot of stolen tech. Alfred even tries to tell the kid to go home, to sit this out because the scale of the rot in the city is just too big. He warns Bruce that he's making a colossal mistake, that this mission won't just get him killed, it will destroy everyone he loved. But in that warning, we see the shift from Alfred the agent to Alfred the man who finally sees something worth protecting. He realizes that Bruce isn't a vigilante playing at war. He is a force of nature born from the asphalt. He sees a man who could have been a monster, but instead chose to be a shield for his friend, for his city. A shield he wished he could have been for his dad. Alfred's role shifts from a critic to a reluctant witness, and eventually to the only person who can help Bruce bridge the gap between being a local legend and a global symbol. In the Absolute Universe, Alfred doesn't help Bruce find it or give Bruce his mission. He validates it. He recognizes that while Bruce might be an anomaly, he is the only honest thing Gotham has left, inspiring Alfred to look inside himself for what's left in him. There's a persistent misconception, along with a lot of other misconceptions, in modern fandom that Batman must be an unstoppable bat god to be compelling. We've grown so used to the man who has a contingency for the end of the universe that we've forgotten what it's like to see him actually struggle to pay rent and have to steal with Selina to live in his usual penthouse, or even fix a broken rib without help. Absolute Batman argues that the Bat God is a ceiling and it's time to break through it, not by having him win a fortune or win the lottery, but by going lower. By stripping Bruce of his billions, the story raises the stakes of every single beat. In this run, violence isn't a choreographed dance, it's not some art, it's a car crash. When Bruce takes a hit, it's not absorbed by a $1 trillion military-funded carbon fiber weave. It's absorbed by whatever he was able to patch his suit with, steal from a construction site, or engineer the night before. This Bruce doesn't have the luxury of being a detached shadow yet. His morality isn't reinforced with years of mountaintop martial arts. It's the restraint of a massively disciplined, self-built will machine. It's all the more impressive because it's tested in the mud and the grime of the streets he protects. Every time Bruce chooses restraint over rage, or compassion over a quick tactical win, he earns that oversized bat symbol axe blade on his chest. He isn't a legend because he's inevitable or the world's greatest detective yet. He's a legend because he's a man who refuses to stay down, in a world that is constantly stepping on him, sometimes literally. At its core, Absolute Batman isn't just a remix. It isn't asking whether Batman should be darker, bigger, or more extreme, though it certainly delivers on the spectacle. It's asking a much more uncomfortable, fundamental question. If you take away the Wayne Manor, the global satellite network, and the wonderful toys, is Bruce Wayne still Batman? And even more so, what do we expect Batman to be anymore? The answer we get is a resounding bone deep yes on the first part. And I think for many of us, this series has forced us to sort of reflect on what we expect and even what we want Batman to be. Because these first 14 issues prove that Batman was never about the cape. He was never about the car. He was never the sum of his gadgets or the height of his tower. Batman at his most legendary is a choice. It's the choice to intervene when it would be easier to look away, whether that's action paired with philanthropy and resources or something else. It's the choice to care about a city that feels like it's already dead. It's the choice to turn a shared trauma, a communal sum of scars, into a beacon of hope instead of a cycle of violence and destruction. Snyder and the creative team on this book have reminded us that Batman doesn't need to be a billionaire to be a legend. He just needs to be the guy who stands in the gap. In this new absolute universe, Bruce Wayne doesn't fight to preserve a status quo that favored him despite tragedy. He fights to be what no one else will. He fights to be the legend that stirs a city out of decay and provides a catalyst for change. If you've made it this far, thank you so much again for watching. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. It really does mean a lot to me and it helps me continue to make these videos. We have a lot of fun projects, not only in this comic video essay style coming up, but lots of character overviews, histories, stories, and even a big cosplay project I'm getting ready to show the very first long part of. So I'm really excited about the future, and thank you again for everybody who's been here over the last month or so as we started to grow.